My fiancée and her brother conspired to steal my $45 million business. They forged legal documents, hired a fake lawyer, and spent $122,000 of my money. But I caught them red-handed in my office, and now he's serving 3 years in prison. I'm 34 years old. I own a chain of 12 organic grocery stores across 3 states, and 6 months ago I was about to marry someone who literally tried to steal my business. And when I say steal, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. I mean, there were fake lawyers involved, fraudulent documents, the whole thing. But let me start from the beginning, because this story is so absurd that I still have a hard time believing it. I met Kimberly about 4 years ago at a sustainable business conference. One of those things where everyone talks about biodegradable packaging and ethical supply chains. She worked in social media marketing for fashion brands and was incredibly smart, super charismatic, and honestly seemed to understand my vision for the business better than anyone. I fell pretty hard pretty fast. I'll admit it. We started dating like 2 months after we met, and things were great for the first 3 years. Like really great. She supported me with the business, came to new store openings, knew all my employees, and I thought, this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. For context, I built this business from scratch over 10 years. I started with a single store in Portland a decade ago, working like 80 hours a week, sleeping in the back office some days because I couldn't afford rent and the location at the same time. It was brutal, honestly, but it was worth it because now I have 12 stores that are doing really well. We employ almost 300 people, and last year we did like $45 million in revenue. I'm not telling you this to brag, but so you understand what was at stake here, you know what I mean? So, a year and a half ago, I proposed to Kimberly. It was at one of our stores, after closing, surrounded by organic flowers and candles. Yeah, I know, super cheesy, but she loved it. She said yes. We both cried. It was beautiful, all that stuff. And then, like 3 weeks later, we had the conversation about the prenuptial agreement. I didn't want to have it, honestly, because I felt uncomfortable talking about money and possible divorces when we had just gotten engaged, but my corporate lawyer basically forced me to. He told me, Ethan, you have a multi-million-dollar business. You can't get married without legal protection, period. So we sat down one night at my house with a bottle of wine and talked about the prenup. And here's the crazy thing. Kimberly was super reasonable about it. She told me, look, I completely understand that the business is yours. You built it before you met me. It makes sense to protect it. We talked about how she would keep her marketing career, how we would divide assets we acquired together after marriage, alimony if it came to that, all very civilized and fair. My lawyer prepared a document that basically said the business and its future expansions remained 100% mine, but anything we bought together would be divided equitably. Kimberly read it, said it seemed fair to her, and we signed a preliminary version. I felt relieved, honestly, because I had heard horror stories about couples fighting about this for months. Everything was going well until like 3 months ago. Kimberly's brother, Mitchell, came back to town. This guy. I don't even know where to start with him. Mitchell is 37. He's been married 3 times, and all 3 times ended in super ugly divorces where he basically tried to take his ex-wife's money. He's also had like 5 businesses that failed spectacularly, including a restaurant that closed after 6 months because apparently Mitchell was stealing from the cash register, and a tech startup that never took off because he didn't understand anything about technology, but still convinced investors to give him money. He's that type of person, the one who always has a new get-rich-quick scheme but never wants to do the actual work. When Mitchell showed up, Kimberly was excited because she hadn't seen him in like 2 years. He'd been living in Florida after his last divorce. She organized a family dinner so I could get to know him better, though technically, we'd already seen each other at family gatherings before. The dinner was weird, honestly. Mitchell kept asking me questions about the business, like super specific questions about profit margins, supplier contracts, expansion plans, and I thought he was just being polite and showing interest. But looking back, I should have seen it as the giant red flag it was. After that dinner, Kimberly's behavior started to change. At first, they were small things that I didn't even register as problems. She started spending more money, like buying designer clothes and expensive jewelry, which had never been her style before. When I asked her about it, she told me she wanted to look good for the wedding, and that, besides, she deserved it because she worked hard. And she was right. She did work hard, so I didn't think much of it. But then she started asking me weird questions about the business, like asking me if I would ever consider giving her an official role in the company, or saying things like, when we're married, we could expand into luxury markets, or we should hire someone from my family for the marketing team. I told her we already had a marketing team that worked well and that I didn't mix family with business, but she kept insisting in a way that made me uncomfortable. Then, like 2 months ago, my assistant Heather called me on a Friday afternoon and told me she needed to see me urgently. I went to the office, was about to go home, and she had this total panic face. She handed me a folder and said, "Ethan, look at this right now." I opened the folder and almost had a heart attack. It was a version of the prenuptial agreement that I had never seen before. The changes were absolutely insane. In this new version, Kimberly would get 50% of all existing stores, 60% of any future expansion, a monthly salary of $25,000 as an executive, consultant, even if we got divorced, and basically veto rights over any major business decisions. I mean, it literally would have made me a minority partner in my own business that I built for a decade before I met her. I asked Heather where she got this from, and she told me it had arrived by certified mail that morning from a law firm I had never heard of, requesting my final signature. The document had Kimberly's signature and supposedly mine too on the amendment pages, but I swear to you, on everything I hold dear, that I never saw that version before. The signatures looked real. The paper had the official letterhead. Everything looked legitimate, except for the small detail that the content was total madness, and I would never have signed something like that in a million years. That night I got home and Kimberly was making dinner like nothing was wrong. I put the document on the kitchen table and said, "What the hell is this?" She didn't even look surprised to see it, which should have. It's been my first clue that she knew exactly what I was talking about. She told me very calmly that they were just standard adjustments that her lawyer had suggested to protect her in case things didn't work out. I said, "Kimberly, these aren't standard adjustments. This is basically a plan to steal my business." And she got angry, told me I was being dramatic and controlling, that she just wanted financial security, and that after all, we were going to be husband and wife, so what did it matter whose business it really was? We fought for like 2 hours. I tried to explain to her that there was a huge difference between reasonable financial protection and literally taking half of something that existed years before we met. She kept saying that if I really loved her, I wouldn't have a problem sharing everything with her, and I responded that that wasn't love, that was manipulation, and things got ugly, basically. That night I slept in the guest room, and the next day, I called my corporate, a lawyer in emergency mode. My lawyer reviewed the document and confirmed what I already knew, that this was absurd and probably fraudulent. He explained that the signatures appeared to be forgeries or that someone had used digital editing technology to put them there. He said we were going to need to investigate who prepared this document and how it came to have my apparent signature when I had never seen it. Meanwhile, he recommended that I stay away from Kimberly until we understood what was happening and that I definitely not sign anything else related to the marriage. But wait, because it gets worse. Like a week after that fight, I had an important meeting with potential investors to expand the chain to California. We were in the conference room of my main office, like 5 serious investors in $5,000 suits, and suddenly Kimberly walks in unannounced. She had gotten past security by telling the receptionist she was my future wife and that she was allowed to be there, which technically was true because it had never been a problem before. She interrupted the meeting and told me in front of everyone that we needed to talk about our business and about how she wanted to be more involved in expansion decisions. The investors looked super uncomfortable. I was mortified, and I basically had to ask her to leave and apologize like 1,000 times to the investors afterward. That meeting didn't end well, by the way. The investors pulled out saying they needed to reconsider the company's management structure before committing funds. I was furious, like I had never been so angry in my life. I sent Kimberly a message telling her we needed to have a serious conversation and to involve her family because obviously something bigger was going on here. She agreed, and we organized a meeting at her parents' house. Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, who had always treated me well and who I thought were reasonable people. The meeting was a total nightmare. I arrived in Kimberly's. The whole family was there, her parents, her sister Jasmine, and of course Mitchell. I started to explain what had happened with the modified prenup and the disruption of my business meeting, and before I could finish, Mitchell interrupted and basically gave a completely distorted version of everything. He said, I was a controlling cheapskate who wanted to keep Kimberly without access to resources, that I had forbidden her to work. Totally false. She had her own career that I always supported, and that basically I was trying to trap her in a marriage where she would have no rights to anything. Her parents started looking at me with distrust, and I realized that Mitchell had been filling their heads with lies for weeks, probably since he came back to town. I tried to defend myself, show them copies of the original agreement that Kimberly had happily accepted versus the new fraudulent document, but Mitchell kept talking over me, saying things like, rich men always do this, and, my sister, deserves to be treated as an equal partner. Kimberly was sitting there not saying anything, which seemed really weird to me, and Jasmine, her sister, looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything either. In the end, I left that house feeling like the villain when I was literally the victim of an attempted fraud. A few days later, I decided to do something that probably wasn't the most mature, but that I needed to do. I sent Mitchell a message saying I wanted to talk to him alone, man to man, to clear things up. He agreed, and we met at a coffee shop near his apartment. I had my phone in my shirt pocket recording audio, which is legal in my state. With one-party consent, I checked with my lawyer beforehand. We sat down, ordered coffee, and started talking. At first, Mitchell was acting all friendly, saying things like, look, man, I just want what's best for my sister, and I'm sure we can work this out like adults. But I pressed him a little, asked him directly why. He thought Kimberly. He needed 50% of a business that existed before I met her, and slowly, he started to show himself. He told me that she deserves to be comfortable, and that marriage is a partnership in everything, including business assets. I asked him if he had anything to do with the modified document, and he got defensive. But then, and this was the incredible part, he started talking about how he could help with business management if Kimberly and I needed it. And he specifically mentioned that he had experience in multiple industries and that he could take a consulting role in the company. That's when I understood everything. Mitchell hadn't just manipulated Kimberly into trying to steal my business, he wanted to get in too. He wanted a piece of the pie, probably a salary, maybe even shares eventually. This was never about protecting Kimberly. It was about him finding another way to try to get rich without working for it, this time using his sister as his ticket in. I told him very clearly that that was never going to happen, that he was not going to have any role in my company, and that if Kimberly wanted to be with me, we were going back to the original prenuptial agreement, or there would be no marriage. He got super angry, called me several things I'm not going to repeat, and basically threatened me, saying I was going to regret not treating them right. I left that coffee shop with a 47-minute recording where Mitchell basically admitted that he had been influencing Kimberly and that he wanted a position in the company. Things got really crazy after that. Like 2 days later, Heather called me again, this time at 10 p.m., and told me she had found Mitchell in my office. Apparently, he had gotten a copy of Kimberly's access key. She had one because sometimes she brought me lunch or picked up things when I was traveling, and was literally in my private office, going through files on my computer. Heather was only there because she had forgotten her wallet and came back to get it. She called building security, and they caught Mitchell with a USB drive connected to my computer, downloading God knows what information. Security called the police. Mitchell was arrested for trespassing, and when we checked what he had been trying to download, it was everything about my supplier contracts, financial information from the stores, customer data, expansion projections, basically everything you would need if you wanted to either compete with me or sell that information to my competitors. I was in total shock. This situation had gone from being a weird prenup problem to literally being corporate espionage. I confronted Kimberly that same night over the phone and asked her if she knew what her brother had been doing. She started crying and told me she had no idea, that Mitchell had told her he just wanted to help by better understanding the business so he could advise her in the prenup negotiations. I told her that was exactly the problem, that there shouldn't be negotiations about an agreement we had both already accepted and that her family was clearly manipulating her to try to get money out of me. She yelled at me that I was being paranoid and that her family only cared about her, and I yelled back that her family, or at least Mitchell, was literally trying to steal from my company. The next day, I hired a private investigator to look more closely at what was going on. I know that sounds extreme, but at this point, I didn't trust anything they told me anymore. The investigator did his work for like a week and discovered that Kimberly had been sharing confidential business documents with Mitchell for at least 2 months. He had records of her taking photos of files in my home office, forwarding my emails that contained sensitive financial information, and there were even text messages between them where Mitchell gave her specific instructions about what information he needed and how to get it without me noticing. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. This was the woman I was going to marry, with whom I had planned to have children, with whom I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life. And it turns out she had been working with her brother to basically destroy me financially for months. I couldn't even eat. Honestly, I spent like 3 days without sleeping more than 2 hours a night, just thinking about how I didn't see this coming and how much I had trusted the wrong person. I made a decision. I sent Kimberly a formal email, copying my lawyer, where I told her that the marriage was canceled, that the original prenuptial agreement was voided because there was no marriage, and that I needed her to return all the keys to my house and office immediately. I also attached evidence of everything: copies of the fraudulent prenup, the recording of my conversation with Mitchell, the security reports from when they found him in my office, and the private investigator's findings about her sharing confidential information. I gave her 48 hours to return everything and told her that if she didn't comply, I would take legal action for theft of intellectual property and conspiracy to commit fraud. You know what she did? In those 48 hours, Kimberly went shopping. And when I say she went shopping, I mean she spent $122,000 in 3 days using an emergency credit card I had given her to use, only if something serious happened while I was traveling. She bought designer clothes, jewelry, furniture, even a $35,000 Rolex watch. My bank called me to verify it wasn't fraud because the charges were so large and so frequent that they triggered their alert systems. I called her immediately and asked her what the hell she was doing. She told me, very calmly, that she was securing her assets because I was leaving her with nothing after she had invested years in our relationship. I told her that's not how any of this worked, and that she was literally stealing from me at this point, and that I was going to said, cancel the card right then. She told me she would sue me for emotional distress if I did. I told her to go ahead, to sue, and literally, while I was on the phone with her, I called the bank with my other line and canceled the card. She started screaming over the phone, saying I was a monster. How could I do this to her? That she loved me, and I was throwing everything away over misunderstandings. I told her they weren't misunderstandings, that there was clear evidence of fraud and conspiracy, and that if she really loved me, she never would have participated in this in the first place. She hung up, crying, and I sat in my office feeling literally empty inside, like everything I cared about had been scooped out of me with a spoon. Things stayed relatively quiet for like a week after that. Kimberly sent me messages every day telling me to forgive her, that she had been influenced by Mitchell, that she really loved me and we could start over. I ignored her because honestly, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe she really had been manipulated and it wasn't 100% her fault, but the rational part of my brain knew that she had made conscious decisions to betray my trust, and that couldn't be undone, period. Then Jasmine, Kimberly's sister, called me. We had never been super close, but she had always treated me well at family gatherings. She told me she needed to see me urgently, that she had found something I should know about. We met at a Starbucks near her work, and she arrived with a laptop. She explained that she had been at Mitchell's apartment helping him move. His bail terms required him to leave the state, and had found his old laptop in a closet. Out of curiosity, and probably suspecting something, she turned it on and found files that basically proved everything had been planned. She showed me the laptop and I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mitchell had folders full of documents about me and my business going back like 4 months, right after he came back to town. There were spreadsheets calculating what 50% of my company would be worth, projections of how much he could consult monthly from me, even a detailed timeline of how they were going to execute the plan. There were saved messages between him and Kimberly where he basically told her exactly what questions to ask me, how to bring up the topic of being more involved in the business. There were even instructions on how to act during our fight about the prenup to make me feel guilty. The most disturbing thing was that there were emails between Mitchell and someone pretending to be a lawyer, but who was probably a friend of his or maybe even Mitchell himself using another identity, preparing the fraudulent prenup document. There were notes about how to forge my signature using editing software, discussions about how much they could extract from me before I realized, and backup plans in case I discovered the scheme, including ideas about how Kimberly could sue me for various invented reasons to get a financial settlement anyway. Jasmine was crying as she showed me all this. She told me she had always thought Mitchell was an idiot, but never imagined he could be this evil, and that she couldn't believe Kimberly had participated in this. I asked her if her parents knew about this, and she said no. That's why she wanted to show it to me first before confronting the rest of the family. I told her I needed copies of everything to give to my lawyer, and she agreed. Said Mitchell deserved to face full consequences for this, and that Kimberly also needed to understand the magnitude of what she had done. With this new evidence, my lawyer was able to build a super solid case. We filed charges against Mitchell not only for trespassing and theft, but also for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, and something called corporate espionage because we had discovered that he had tried to sell my company's information to one of my competitors. Apparently, he had contacted the CEO of a rival supermarket chain, offering him data about my suppliers and expansion strategy in exchange for $50,000. We had the complete emails where he negotiated the price. When all this information came to light, Kimberly's family finally saw Mitchell for what he really was. Her parents called me to apologize, told me that Mitchell had completely deceived them, and that if they had known the truth from the beginning, they never would have treated me with distrust at that horrible family meeting. I appreciated the apology, but honestly, the damage was already done. Not just with Mitchell, but with Kimberly. Kimberly tried to see me in person after her parents and Jasmine confronted her with all the evidence. She showed up at my house. He had changed the locks, but she stood outside ringing the doorbell for like 20 minutes until I finally came out. She was devastated, crying, saying that only now did she fully understand how Mitchell had manipulated her, that she thought she was just securing her future and didn't realize she was part of a criminal scheme. She begged me to give her another chance, that she never wanted to hurt my business, that she really loved me. I think Mitchell really did manipulate her to some extent. He's that kind of person, someone who can convince you that up is down if you give him enough time. But at the same time, Kimberly was a 9-year-old adult with her own successful career. She wasn't a naive child. She made the decision to share confidential information, to go through my files, to spend $122,000 of my money in a revenge tantrum. Those were her choices, no matter how much influence Mitchell had. I told her this, as gently as I could under the circumstances, and explained that I couldn't be with someone I didn't trust, period. Trust was everything to me, and she had completely destroyed it. It didn't matter if she had been manipulated or if she was really sorry now. The fact was that when things got tough, and when there was pressure from her family, she chose money over me, she chose Mitchell over our relationship, and that told me everything I needed to know about who she really was beneath the surface. She kept crying, saying she would change, but I told her it wasn't about changing. It was about the foundation of our relationship being broken, and there was no way to fix it. After that conversation, Kimberly hired a different lawyer, a third lawyer at this point. She'd gone through 2 already, and tried to sue me for emotional distress and damage to her professional reputation. Her argument was that I had publicly humiliated her family by exposing Mitchell's scheme and filing charges, and that this had damaged her ability to work in marketing because now clients associated her with the scandal. My lawyer basically laughed when he read the lawsuit and said it had no legal basis, that I had done exactly what any reasonable person would do when they discover fraud and conspiracy, and that if anything, I had more grounds to sue her for what she had done. Mitchell eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges after his public defender explained to him that with all the evidence we had against him, there was no way to win at trial. He got 3 years in prison, 5 years probation after, and a permanent order to stay away from me and my business. The judge also ordered restitution for the money Kimberly had spent with my card, which was a small victory, I guess, though honestly, the money wasn't the point at that stage. Kimberly's lawsuit was dismissed as I predicted, and her lawyer even recommended she not try to appeal because she would only accumulate more legal costs for nothing. I think she finally understood there was no way to win this, that she had burned all her bridges, and that the best option was to move on with her life somewhere else. The last I heard of her, she had moved to Chicago to start over, away from her family and definitely away from me. I had to make big changes in my business after all this. I upgraded all our security protocols, implemented dual authentication access systems, hired a dedicated corporate security officer, and basically bulletproofed the company against future attempts at infiltration or information theft. I also had to work on rebuilding my reputation with those investors who had been interested in financing the California expansion, which took months of meetings and explanations about what had happened and how I had handled the situation. Now, 6 months later, the stores are better than ever, honestly. We opened 2 new locations last month, the team is working incredibly well, and financially we're in a super solid position. But personally, the truth is I'm still processing everything. I haven't dated anyone since Kimberly, not because I don't want to, but because I simply don't trust my own judgment about people right now. I thought I knew her. I thought I understood who she was, and I was completely wrong, and that scares me. My friends tell me that eventually I'll trust someone again, that what happened with Kimberly was an extreme situation and doesn't represent how relationships normally are. Rationally, I know they're right, but emotionally, I still feel like anyone who approaches me could be interested in my money and not in me as a person. It's a horrible feeling. Honestly, like the success I worked so hard to build is now a curse that makes it impossible to know who's genuine and who's not. Last week, Heather, my assistant who basically saved me from this disaster by finding the fraudulent prenup, and then Mitchell in my office, asked me how I was really doing. I told her the truth, that I was fine professionally but emotionally still a mess. She gave me a hug and told me that the fact that I could still admit vulnerability meant I wasn't completely broken, that I would eventually heal. I hope she's right. For now, I'm focusing on the business, on my employees who depend on me, and on trying to learn from this experience without letting it turn me into someone bitter or cynical forever. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I guess time will tell.